Hey guys, what are you doing right now? Maybe you're relaxing, taking a break, or just trying to make sense of the constant flow of information that surrounds us every day. Today, we're going to slowly unpack something that's been happening in the world that most people have heard about, but very few fully understand. It's a situation that has unfolded over many months, even years, marked by a fascinating cascade of official statements, legal filings, and public disclosures that, when viewed together, present a mosaic of information that remains stubbornly incomplete. We're talking about the procedural unraveling of what was once one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges globally, FTX, and the ongoing, complex efforts to navigate its collapse, and the subsequent legal and financial reclamation. The general public first really became aware of the depths of the issues surrounding FTX in early November of 2022. Initial reports, particularly one from CoinDesk, began to highlight concerns about the balance sheet of Alameda Research, a sister trading firm closely linked to FTX. This immediately sparked a public dialogue about the interdependencies between these entities. What followed was a swift and dramatic sequence of events: an announced, then quickly withdrawn, acquisition offer by a rival exchange, Binance, followed by a sudden freeze on customer withdrawals from FTX.com. The swiftness of these developments caught many by surprise, including a significant number of individuals and institutions who had entrusted their assets to the platform. At this early stage, the public heard various explanations. The founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, initially communicated through social media, attempting to reassure users about the platform's solvency and asserting that assets were safe. However, these assurances were rapidly superseded by the stark reality of the withdrawal freeze, which quickly escalated into a formal bankruptcy filing in Delaware just days later, on November 11, 2022. This moment marked a critical shift. The narrative began to move from a liquidity crunch, as it was initially portrayed, to something far more fundamentally broken at a structural level. The immediate expectation set by the bankruptcy filing was that a clear, transparent process would begin to identify assets, liabilities, and, ultimately, a path to recovery for creditors. However, almost immediately, the process began to reveal its inherent procedural difficulties. The individual appointed to oversee the bankruptcy proceedings, John Ray III, a veteran of numerous high-profile corporate liquidations including Enron, issued a declaration to the court that was, by all accounts, extraordinary in its candor. He stated that in his decades of experience, he had never seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here. This statement was not just a comment. It was a foundational procedural revelation that immediately signaled the immense challenge ahead. It meant that the standard, established mechanisms for corporate bankruptcy, which typically rely on audited financial statements, clear ledgers, and identifiable asset registers, were, in this case, severely hampered from the outset. Over the subsequent months, the information flow to the public became a complex tapestry of official court filings, press statements from various legal teams, regulatory announcements from multiple global jurisdictions, and fragmented media reports. We began to see how delays in identifying assets were not just technical hitches, but were rooted in what Mr. Ray described as a commingling of assets, a lack of proper record-keeping, and the use of unsecured group email accounts for financial management. Each new court filing, often hundreds of pages long, would slowly contribute another piece to the puzzle, detailing the discovery of new bank accounts, digital wallets, or shell entities. But these disclosures were often dense, highly technical, and difficult for the average person to synthesize into a clear, linear understanding of events. The sheer volume of legal proceedings across various international courts in places like the Bahamas, Antigua, and the United States added layers of jurisdictional complexity, creating a situation where different aspects of the same overall issue were being addressed in parallel, sometimes with conflicting procedural requirements. The initial public reaction, characterized by shock and anger over the sudden loss of access to funds, slowly evolved into a broader public discourse about the regulatory landscape of digital assets, the responsibilities of platforms, and the intricacies of international finance. Media coverage, initially focused on the dramatic personalities involved, gradually shifted to dissecting the procedural aspects. The progress of asset recovery, the legal strategies employed by the debtor's attorneys, and the timelines for potential creditor distributions. However, even with extensive media attention, a consolidated, easily digestible timeline of events and financial flows remained elusive. Updates on asset recovery, for instance, were often reported as aggregate figures from the bankruptcy estate, without always detailing the specific sources, types of assets, or the precise methods of their recovery, leaving a sense of ongoing, undisclosed procedural effort beneath the headline numbers. In a typical corporate bankruptcy, there's usually a relatively clear initial picture of the company's financial state, based on previous audits and established accounting practices. The process then involves valuing assets, negotiating with creditors, and formulating a plan for reorganization or liquidation. The FTX case, however, deviated significantly from this norm. The initial hurdle wasn't just about valuing assets, but about identifying them in the first place, distinguishing between corporate funds, customer funds, and funds that had been transferred between various related entities in ways that were not immediately transparent. This fundamental procedural ambiguity meant that even basic questions, like the precise number of affected customers or the total value of their claims, have been subject to continuous revision and refinement throughout the bankruptcy process. Estimates of recovered assets have periodically increased, often announced as significant milestones, yet the precise allocation and the final journey of these funds back to their rightful owners continue to be part of a protracted, multi-stage legal and administrative process, with timelines that stretch far into the future. What still remains procedurally unclear, despite the voluminous court records and public statements, are the complete and granular details of the internal financial movements across the sprawling FTX empire in the period leading up to its collapse. While various legal proceedings, including criminal trials, have shed light on certain aspects of alleged misuse of funds, the full, forensic accounting of every transaction, every transfer between Alameda Research and FTX customer accounts, and the precise timing and rationale behind every key financial decision made by the firm's leadership during its final months, is a gargantuan task that continues to unfold. The legal battles over the characterization of certain funds, whether they constitute customer property or part of the general bankruptcy estate, are ongoing, highlighting persistent disagreements about the application of established legal principles to novel digital asset structures, the ultimate operational structure and regulatory framework that might emerge for any potential new FTX or successor entity, and how that would compare to the original entity's operations, also remains a matter of broad discussion and intricate procedural planning, without a final, universally accepted path yet articulated. The slow, iterative process of gathering, validating, and disseminating this information ensures that the full, coherent picture of what transpired and the ultimate resolution for all involved parties continues to be a matter of ongoing, painstaking procedural discovery and legal negotiation.